2. Igris the Blood-Red. Boom! The doors to the boss's lair opened. It was dark inside, and even with Jin-Woo's heightened eyesight thanks to his perception stat, it was hard to see far. He could barely make out what he was standing on. The ground was covered in stone slates that were neatly arranged. The interlocking gray slabs made the room feel cold regardless of the actual temperature. As soon as he stepped on one, whoosh! Countless torches on the wall flared up at once and illuminated the area. Like I thought. It's similar to what happened in the underground temple. Jin-Woo was alert as he cautiously moved forward, taking in the room. Giant pillars stood to either side, and at the far end was a large throne. It's just like a king's throne room from a movie, except the scale was exponentially larger. When Jin-Woo ventured farther inside, the doors slammed shut. Slam! Jin-Woo glanced back but wasn't surprised, as he'd been waiting for that to happen. He continued to advance. I'm sensing a formidable presence. Something was telling him he had to reach the throne to complete the job change quest, and his hunches were rarely wrong in this kind of situation. Before he could reach his destination, though, a mysterious figure emerged from behind a pillar 10 paces away and blocked his path. Thump, thump. Thud. The creature stopped and turned to face Jin-Woo. Gulp. Jin-Woo swallowed hard. It was clear from the name that appeared in red above its head that Jin-Woo was in the presence of the boss. Knight Commander Igris the Blood-Red. It was a knight in a red suit of armor. The armor Igris wore was similar to the previous knights, but unlike the simple-minded lackeys, Igris seemed rather sharp. Its helmet in particular caught Jin-Woo's eye. It sported a long, horse-like red mane that stretched from its top and went down the back. As he inspected the helmet, Jin-Woo spotted another difference. Are those eyes? He wasn't sure if he should call them eyes or pupils, but regardless, dim silver lights glowed where its eyes should have been. They felt cold and almost mechanical. An icy gaze was fixed on Jin-Woo. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. Was this the presence I felt before? Defeating this knight could very well be the objective of the job change quest, which meant he should proceed with caution. He raised his fists and took a fighting stance as he kept an eye on Igris's movements. My dagger wouldn't work on it anyway. Blunt force was what he needed to defeat knights. Igris, who had been silently gazing at Jin-Woo, suddenly removed its cloak. Thump! The cloak fell to the ground. What's it doing? The odd display didn't end there. Igris then unbelted its sword from its waist and 2 daggers from behind it, holding them up one by one before dropping them on the ground. It was almost like it wanted Jin-Woo to be aware of what it was doing. Clank! Clang! The sound of metal hitting stone echoed throughout the vast lair. Upon discarding its weapons, Igris raised its fists and took a similar fighting stance, as if mocking Jin-Woo. Jin-Woo was flabbergasted. Was Igris planning to engage him with its fists just because Jin-Woo himself was? Jin-Woo bit his bottom lip. It's looking down on me. At the potential provocation, Jin-Woo's face began heating up. The more intense his emotions were, the more worked up he became. As fast as his heart was pounding, his eyes were laser-focused. Bring it! As if Igris had read Jin-Woo's mind, the knight charged at him. TMP, 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 TMP. Igris moved so quickly, it was hard to believe it was wearing armor. The armor's speed penalty only affects those with a strength stat less than 80. Which meant that the knight's strength was at least 80. The way Igris moved, its agility also matched that of a high-rank hunter. When it was close, Igris leaped into the air. TMP. It aimed its knee at Jin-Woo's face. It's fast. But Jin-Woo was ready, pushing his reflex speed to the max. He bent backward at a nearly 90-degree angle to avoid the attack, then straightened up. Igris immediately made a nimble landing, unlike the other knights that had regularly fallen victim to their momentum. Thud! Jin-Woo didn't have time to marvel at its smooth movements. He swiftly ran toward Igris before the knight could turn around and kicked at the monster's face. Despite being unbalanced, Igris could still move its hand with precision. Wham! Igris easily blocked Jinwoo's right leg with its left hand. No way. Jin-Woo was incredulous. With one of its opponent's feet out of commission, Igris slammed its fists at Jinwoo's face. Whoosh! Jin-Woo instinctively raised his arms to guard, but doing so did nothing to lessen the impact. Bam! His arms flailed as his body flew into the air. Wah! Jinwoo's alarmed gasp quickly turned into a groan of pain. Igris was already in front of him. Jin-Woo didn't have time to react before Igris's left fist smashed into the side of his face. Wham! Jin-Woo crashed into the ground, his body rebounding and rolling away for a bit. It took a moment for him to get back on his feet. Re-ying. His ears were ringing. He shook his head hard a few times, and the ringing diminished slightly. But that was the least of his worries. Jinwoo's blurry vision caught sight of Igris striding toward him. Thump, thump. Jin-Woo forced his eyes wide open and tensed his legs. Igris came to a stop right in front of him. That was when the true pummeling began. Igris didn't even try to block Jinwoo's strikes but instead weathered the punches and then delivered its own. Bam! Jin-Woo knocked Igris's head slightly to one side, and it swiftly returned the favor even before Jin-Woo could retract his arm. Bam! Jin-Woo's body swayed. Bam! Igris was pushed back a step this time. Bam! A punch in the gut had Jin-Woo doubling over. Gak! He coughed up blood. How is this happening? He currently had a physical damage reduction of over 30%, but each of Igris's punches felt like he was getting whacked around with a hammer. On the other hand, his own attacks weren't doing much damage at all. The battle didn't last long. Bam! Jinwoo's knees eventually buckled. Whump! He tried to get up, but his legs wouldn't bear his weight. Whump! Ngggh, Igris wordlessly loomed over him. The knight ignored Jinwoo's befuddled look and outstretched its hand toward its sword across the room, and the blade flew into its hand. The knight gripped the sword with both hands, moved to Jinwoo's side, and raised the point to the sky. Jin-Woo realized Igris's plan. It wants to behead me. It was really living up to the title of Knight Commander. When Jin-Woo offered no resistance, Igris proceeded with the execution. Of course, Jin-Woo had absolutely no intention of going down without a fight. The blade dropped. Whoosh! And as it did, Jin-Woo raised his left fist and blocked the strike. Clang! It was the sound of metal hitting metal. The gauntlets Jin-Woo had recently acquired protected his hands. Flinch! Jin-Woo could tell Igris had been caught off guard. He took this opportunity to deliver a punch with his right fist. As he expected, Igris didn't bother to dodge. You're planning to return the favor again. But the knight hadn't accounted for one thing. Kasaka's venom fong. Whom? In a flash, Kasaka's venom fong appeared in Jinwoo's hand, and he drove it into the knight's eye. Shunk! Gra-awa! The scream that followed sounded inhuman. At the same time, a beam of light shot out of the eye with the dagger in it. Jin-Woo pulled himself to his feet. Now what? Taking out one eye wasn't going to end this battle. He needed a finishing move. He was then struck with an idea as he recalled a terrifying attack that had almost killed him once. He decided Igris should get a taste. Jin-Woo was already on the move before he realized it. He lowered his stance and wrapped his arms around Igris's waist. Then he started running. Gra-ah! Igris struck Jin-Woo's back several times, and the hunter struggled from the pain. Jin-Woo gritted his teeth and held on tight. Rather, he sped up. Dash! Your speed has increased by 40%. Jin-Woo's legs went faster, and his whole body shook at the velocity. Yes, just like this. He would crush Igris. Keeping a firm grip on his opponent, he hurtled toward a wall. Of course, the impact would also have devastating consequences for him, but he had one more passive skill up his sleeve. The gap closed in a blink of an eye, and the wall was right there. Boom! Igris crashed into the wall. As it did, a notification displayed. Ping. Skill, willpower has been activated, as your HP is below 30%. Your damage will decrease by 50%. The force of the impact was so great, the entire lair quaked briefly. Ugh. Jin-Woo stumbled back. Igris was embedded in the wall but still alive. The fire of life continued burning inside it. I need to end this. Jin-Woo pulled Kasaka's venom fawn out of Igris's eye, and its body twitched. Jin-Woo got a good grip and struck at the knight's throat. Fatal strike. Clang. The attack glanced off. Again. Fatal strike. Clang. Sparks flew. There were now scratches on the metal plate protecting its neck. Again. Fatal strike. Clang. Again. Clang. Again. Clang. And finally. Fatal strike. Shunk. Kasaka's venom fang sank deep into its throat. You have defeated Knight Commander Igris the Bloodred. You have leveled up. You have leveled up. Jin-Woo raised his arms in victory. He withdrew a couple of steps and then dropped to the ground on his hands and knees as his legs gave way. Huff, huff. He released the breath he had been holding. He'd barely won. It had been extremely close. But is the quest not over? Jin-Woo took his time catching his breath, then heaved himself up. He thought killing this creature would be the end of the quest, but the system was silent. Looking around, he noticed that nothing had changed. Well, one thing was different. Several lights were emanating from Igris's prone form. There were items to collect. Let's take care of this first. He had no idea what might happen next, after all. Picking up as many items as he could whenever he could would be the best call. Jin-Woo reached out his hand. You have discovered item, Crimson Knight's helmet. Would you like to acquire it? You have discovered runestone, Ruler's hand. Would you like to acquire it? You have discovered item, leather pouch. Would you like to acquire it? You have discovered item, instant teleportation stone. Would you like to acquire it? There was a startling number of items, which puzzled Jin-Woo, but it also delighted him. Acquire all. The leather pouch was the first to be processed. You have opened item, leather pouch. It contains 1,500,000 gold. You have acquired 1,500,000 gold. Jin-Woo's eyes went huge. These rewards are on a completely different level. It had been a hard-fought battle, but the rewards made it worthwhile. He hadn't been expecting much from the leather pouch, let alone 1,500,000 gold. He could now afford plenty of worthwhile items from the shop. But Jin-Woo's attention was on something else. If an item he didn't expect much from was this good, how valuable would the helmet or runestone be? He tried to lower his expectations as he brought up the helmet's info. Ping. Item, Crimson Knight's helmet, acquisition difficulty, S category, protective gear physical damage decrease, plus 15% stamina plus 20, strength plus 20 S rank. Jin-Woo hooped. This was his first S rank item. A 15% physical damage decrease would have been good enough, but it would also raise his strength and stamina stats by 20 points. His heart fluttered just looking at the screen. A rank items can't even compare. He had acquired a couple of A rank items by this point. The first was Kasaka's venom gland from the snake-like Kasaka, and the second was the Warden's collar from the Hellhound Cerberus. These two items had been fantastic in their own right. Despite the strength penalty, the venom gland had decreased any physical damage taken by 20%. And the Warden's collar? As an item that increased his agility and perception by 20 points each, the collar was one of the best items available. But this new Crimson Knight's helmet offered a boost similar to both those items combined without a stat penalty. It really is the best. Jin-Woo was aware he was standing in the middle of a boss lair, but he couldn't stop smiling. That he genuinely liked its design was the cherry on top. Too bad it'll be invisible. The blood-red helmet with the long flowing mane was like a work of art. For a brief moment, he thought about trying on the full set of armor if he could. However, what could have been? Not all parts of Igras's armor were glowing, so he wasn't permitted to acquire them. The only protective gear that was his for the taking was the helmet. He pushed aside his wishful thinking and carefully pulled on the helmet. As usual, the helmet disappeared instantly. Although he wouldn't be able to show it off, the helmet blew up his stats. Stats: Strength, 128, plus 20, Stamina, 87, plus 20, Agility, Intelligence, Perception, Physical damage reduced by 46%, plus 15%. The numbers in the brackets represented the stat increases that came from wearing the helmet. His strength, stamina, and physical damage debuffs had all jumped significantly. He couldn't be more satisfied. His heart raced as he took in the stat changes. Wait, no. He frowned. The quest isn't over, so let's not get too excited just yet. Besides, he had more items to check out. His gaze shifted to the other two items in anticipation. Rune Stone, Ruler's Hand, item, Instant Teleportation Stone. Of the two walnut-sized stones, the Instant Teleportation Stone grabbed his attention first. I know what rune stones are, but what was an Instant Teleportation Stone? His curiosity was sated when the information screen came up. Ping. Item, Instant Teleportation Stone, rank? Category, consumable. This item can be obtained only from a job change quest. Crush the stone to be instantly teleported outside the dungeon. If unused, it will automatically be destroyed once the job change quest ends. Cannot be stored in the inventory. Its activation method was identical to that of a runestone, except it was for escaping from the dungeon instead of learning a new skill. Wait, the job change quest isn't over yet? If it had been, the stone would have crumbled by now as per the description. Since it was still intact, that could only mean. Jin-Woo felt a chill creep up his spine. It was strange. He had just obtained one of the top items that would help him escape the dungeon, yet at that moment, he had an ominous feeling. If this stone could be used in regular dungeons outside the system, all hunters would be scrambling to get their hands on one. This small rock was worth one's life, so what price tag wouldn't they pay? And Jin-Woo was no different. The stone took some of the pressure off this quest. If I need to, he could leave the dungeon at any time. However, he couldn't escape the uneasy feeling in the back of his mind. And like he'd thought, the system sounded an alarm, as if it had been waiting for this very moment. Ping. The player has acquired the Instant Teleportation Stone. The job change quest begins now. What the hell? This item triggered the start of the quest? Jin-Woo felt faint, like he'd just realized he'd stepped on a landmine. If I'd known this would happen, I would have rested a little more. It was too late for regrets. No matter how experienced or knowledgeable one was, the future was impossible to predict accurately. Jin-Woo broke out in a cold sweat. He mentally called up the stat window and checked his HP and fatigue. HP, 4161/10270, MP, 390/850, fatigue, 61. Fatigue is a little high, but this is still doable. The helmet's stamina buff had also raised both his total and remaining HP, so there was that at least. Jin-Woo encouraged himself. I can still do this. His life wouldn't really be in danger, since he held the Instant Teleportation Stone in his hand. However, he couldn't shake the notion that the stone symbolized surrender. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been used to trigger the start of the quest. If I give up on the quest, he would be giving up the chance to change his job. Sweat dripped down his forehead and fell to the floor. He licked his dry lips when the next message arrived. Ping. Dimensional gates will be randomly generated in 10 seconds. Dimensional gates? Instead of an answer, large numbers appeared in midair. 10 seconds, it was obviously a countdown. More messages followed. The player has a choice. The player can either leave the dungeon using the Instant Teleportation Stone, 8, 7, 6. The countdown went on. Or survive as long as possible, gathering as many advancement points as possible, and get promoted to a higher class. Survive? Survive what? Jin-Woo exploded in frustration. Despite this, he had already switched out the rune stone for Kasaka's venom fang in his inventory and placed the instant teleportation stone in his back pocket. He was a mess, but he was ready for battle. This was who he was. The job change quest will commence shortly. 4, 3, 2. Jin-Woo anxiously glared at the timer and then scanned the area, his head turning every which way. Something was happening. The space around him was beginning to warp and distort. 1 second, good luck. That was odd. It was the first time the system had expressed any emotion. But there was no time to be surprised. Once the countdown hit 0, gates began forming all around the room. Voom. Voom. It wasn't just 1 or 2. There were 6 or so in his general area and even more scattered throughout the room. The timer simultaneously started counting up. 2 seconds, the clock was ticking, and the amount of time elapsed would be converted into advancement points. Jin-Woo didn't fully understand what the system had said, but he got the gist. The longer I endure, the stronger I'll get. To be exact, he'd get a better job. He couldn't let this opportunity go to waste. He had plenty of both HP and MP left. I'll give it my all. 3 seconds, with precisely 3 seconds on the clock, a countless number of weaponless knights poured out of the gates near him. Thud, 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 thud. The ground trembled from the sea of silver knights. Their numbers could have overwhelmed Jin-Woo, but he had a smile on his face. I can easily take these guys. He was kind of thankful that these knights were his opponents. Had they been monsters at Igris's level, he would have barely lasted a few seconds. First, let's get out of their sight with stealth. He decided to use some of his precious mana. Whom? He began fading from view. As predicted, the charging knights all stopped in their tracks. However, a mage has used skill, Eyes of Detection. The system sounded an alerting chime. Jin-Woo spun around to pinpoint the noise. What? A mage had emerged from a gate and was casting a spell. Jin-Woo caught sight of an eye-shaped symbol floating above its head. As he did, the symbol flashed, and Jin-Woo's stealth was deactivated in an instant. Shit. Things were already going downhill. Fwhip. Fwhip. The knights, standing at attention like telephone poles, all turned their heads toward Jin-Woo at the same time. It was like a scene straight out of a horror movie. The silver wave headed his way. Jin-Woo braced himself. Bam! He punched the head off one of the knights coming at him, and it stopped in its tracks. You have defeated a knight. Jin-Woo's eyes gleamed. Murderous intent. Skill, Murderous Intent has been activated. Debuff, Panic has been activated. All the opponent's abilities will decrease by 50% for 1 minute. The debuff caused a lot of the monsters to slow down, but Jin-Woo's MP was now at 90. Murderous Intent required 100 mana, so he wouldn't be able to use it again. But I bought myself a minute. Jin-Woo set about striking down as many monsters as he could in the span of a minute while they were in this weakened state. Bam! Crack! Bam! KRRRK! He crushed his enemies at an incredible speed. Bam! Bam! Crack! But knights were emerging from the gate faster than he could take them down. Thud, 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 thud. Jin-Woo checked the time amid the chaos. 3 minutes and 19 seconds, 3 minutes and 19 seconds. How many points did that add up to? Could he leave yet? There was no time to stop and calculate things. Knights continued pouring out of the gates non-stop. Though he had disposed of so many already, it was simply impossible to make out the number of knights now swarming the room. Arg! Eventually, Jin-Woo started drowning in the sea of knights. Skill, Willpower has been activated. Skill, Willpower has been activated. His HP took a nosedive and was almost at rock bottom. HP 1036/10270. How much time? 5 minutes and 8 seconds. 5 minutes and 8 seconds. He'd lasted as long as he could. Let's get out of here. Trapped in a suffocating cage of silver, Jin-Woo struggled to reach his back pocket while surrounded by all that armor. However, tink! The instant teleportation stone slipped from his hand. It bounced off a knight's heel and rolled away. No! Jin-Woo desperately reached for the stone, but his hand was blocked by knights. More of them soon started piling on top of him. He was suffocating and found it hard to breathe. Skill, willpower has been activated. Skill, willpower has been activated. He was starting to lose consciousness. Bam! Bam! As he began to fade, incessantly struck by knights, he thought he heard someone snickering at him. This is all your fault, isn't it? Why did you choose to stray off the beaten path? Wasn't it miraculous enough for an E-rank hunter to rise to C or even B rank? That's all you were capable of in the end. Shut up. You've only got yourself to blame. Shut up. Wham! The knights swarming around Jin-Woo were blown away. Even though Jin-Woo was near death, there was life in his eyes. His gaze was brimming with malice. It can't end like this. He'd endured so much for this one opportunity. Having been on the bottommost rung his whole life, he'd craved a seat at the top of society. More than anyone, he knew the sorrows of the weak. Even though he had scratched and clawed his way through life just to survive, all it had gotten him were laughs and jeers. What use is an E-rank? What's the association thinking? They should send someone capable, not. Ugh, I bet he just cowered behind other hunters. He'd been handed a ladder to climb up to the place he'd gazed at longingly for so long, so how could he be expected to just sit back and stare? Hell no. I remember now. He remembered the voices that had just been echoing in his head. It was their voices, the voices of everyone who had ridiculed him behind his back. Well, they could scoff all they wanted. He'd keep struggling with every breath left in him. It didn't matter if he had 10 HP left or even just 1. He would keep going to the bitter end. He'd fight until he couldn't fight anymore. Jin-Woo launched himself into the fray. Whack! He threw a punch and dented a knight's chestplate, sending it flying backward and taking down the ones behind it as well. The knights started charging at him once again. Jin-Woo fought back even harder. Bam! 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 It didn't matter if they met Jin-Woo's fist, elbow, knee, or foot, every enemy that came in contact with him crumpled like a paper doll. Your fatigue is over 70. Your movement will be limited. Jin-Woo slowed as warned, but the malice in his eyes still shone brightly. Knights that didn't go down after 1 or 2 hits would rejoin the brawl, and he would strike them 3 or 4 more times to make sure they stayed down. Crack! 8, 7, 6, 5, meanwhile, another countdown had started. Absorbed in the battle, Jin-Woo didn't notice it until the countdown had reached single digits. What? Is the quest going to be over? For a moment, he had hopes, but they were quickly dashed. 6 minutes and 27 seconds, the timer was still going, so the countdown didn't seem to be related. 4, 3, 2, is this a countdown to my death? Something like that had happened before, right when all this started. The system had told him he would die in 0.02 of a second if he didn't become a player. So if that was the case, Jin-Woo glared fiercely. I'll make it count until the last second. Bam! Crash! 2 more knights went down. However, despite Jin-Woo's determination, his body was a mess. He could barely keep his posture. He had trouble lifting his arms to block the knight's blows. One came at him from the front, another from the rear. Boom! Jin-Woo groaned as they smashed into him from either side. Arg! Other knights pressed in from every angle as if they didn't want to miss a single opportunity. Besieged, Jin-Woo couldn't move a finger. Thud, 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 thud. The knights continued piling on, and the silver wave became a silver mountain. Jin-Woo's breathing grew labored. Huff, huff. It felt like he was about to suffocate to death. Jin-Woo's hand, which protruded through a gap in the crush of nights, uselessly reached to the sky. HP, 93 out of 10 270, it was futile, but still, Jin-Woo didn't give up. Not yet. I can still. As the hand reaching toward the heavens clenched into a fist, the mysterious countdown announced its result. 1-0, you have not completed the daily quest. You will be transferred to the penalty zone. 3, quest results. Jin-Woo was convinced he'd misheard something. Penalty zone? That's when it hit him. He hadn't done the daily quest. He had decided not to in order to test his abilities before tackling the demon's castle dungeon. To think things would turn out like this. Rumble. There was a trembling all around, just like what had happened in the hospital. FSSSSH, FSSSSH. The knights encompassing Jin-Woo disintegrated one by one into sand. The world was transforming. Ha ha, ha. The absurdity of it all made Jin-Woo chuckle bemusely. For some reason, the system message he'd received before the quest began kept replaying in his head. Good luck. Did it mean that the quest was so difficult that he'd need luck on his side? Or was the system encouraging him to get as high a score as he could, even if it meant relying on luck? Call it luck or coincidence, but either way, it was an opportunity. The important thing was how to take advantage of it. Rumble. The quakes grew stronger. Jin-Woo closed his eyes and allowed them to rock him around instead of trying to struggle to find his balance. Don't let it get to you. Everything went silent, and he felt like his body was floating on air. When he opened his eyes again, he was in the heart of a desert. He dropped to his knees where he stood. Ha, huff, huff. He dug his fingers into the sand and let out a shaky breath. Fresh air entered his lungs and circulated through his body. Finally. I can breathe. Swaddled by a sense of relief, Jin-Woo flopped onto his back. Above him was an empty black sky. He took in the endless inky void. It looked just like the penalty zone he remembered. Wait, I don't have time for this. Having just escaped an extremely dangerous situation, he had forgotten that this was no safe zone either. Still, Jin-Woo didn't feel like getting up, so he called up the stat window as he was. HP, 93 tenths 270, MP, 202/850, fatigue, 91, no wonder he felt so drained. His fatigue was over 90. This is the first time it's ever gone over 90, isn't it? He was reluctant to lift even a finger. HP was a problem, too, but his priority was lowering his fatigue. Shop. Ping. The words buy and sell materialized in midair. Jin-Woo had always thought the interface was rather too simplistic, like not much thought had been put into the design, but he now welcomed the sight. He bought the most expensive healing potion available. Once he finalized the purchase. Whom? A glass bottle containing bright red liquid appeared in his open hand. Pop. Jin-Woo pulled out the stopper and poured the potion into his mouth. Gulp, gulp. The red liquid slid down his throat and into his body. Recovering fatigue. Recovering fatigue. Recovering fatigue. Perhaps because it was the most expensive healing potion, he could visibly see his level of fatigue drop. Oddly enough, however, there was no change in his HP, 93 tenths 270, MP, 204/850, fatigue, 0. His HP remained the same even as he finished drinking the potion, which was a direct contrast to his fatigue, which was now at 0. Why is that? Jin-Woo received an answer after he shook the last drop of potion into his mouth. Ping. Healing potions cannot recover HP when it dips below 10% of your total HP. Simple enough. It was because his HP was too low. Makes sense. Healing magic also had limitations, so this concept was nothing new. Just as a healer's level determined their healing ability, the potions could not treat anything outside their restrictions. There's a limit to what healing potions can do. Good to know. If he were to rely too heavily on potions without knowing this, it could have really bitten him in the ass one day. This was why first-hand experience was crucial. How did it go again? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That's why experience was everything. Luckily, Jin-Woo had already survived the penalty zone once before. It's about time. Right on cue, Jin-Woo sensed the presence of some kind of lifeform squirming underneath him. He tucked his legs in and sprang to his feet. His body was light as a feather. The potion had filled him with energy. TMP Jin-Woo stuck the landing and looked back. FSSSSHHH. As he predicted, the spot where he'd been lying was now a sinkhole. I used to think I'd die if I fell down one of those. Now he stood at ease, watching the hole curiously. The bottom of the pit started bubbling. FFFSSSHHHHH. A pillar of sand shot up, and a tremendous centipede emerged. Grara! It was exactly as he remembered. I was terrified when I first saw one of these. This time, it was like he was watching a video in slow motion. Jin-Woo looked to the space above its head. There, he could clearly make out the red letters. Poison-toothed giant desert centipede, its name was in red, the same color as Cerberus at the demon's castle. Just then, he received the quest message. Ping. Penalty quest, survival, objective, survive the required time. Required time, 4 hours remaining time, 4 hours. Jin-Woo was pumped when he read the message. I've bought some time with this. He still had a chance, since he hadn't used the instant teleportation stone to escape. I'll probably be transported back to there as soon as I finish this penalty quest. And if the system counted the time he spent in the penalty zone and the overall time endured, he'd earn a huge amount of advancement points. He couldn't be sure if that was how it would work. But if he thought about how the system was geared to benefit him, he was certain that there'd be a positive outcome from all this. For whole hours, he had been forced to reach for the instant teleportation stone in under 10 minutes, yet he'd somehow gained 4 hours for free just because of the penalty zone. There was only one problem. Could he get out of this place safely with only 100 or so HP? Since it wasn't possible to recover his health with potions, he had to defeat the centipedes with as little damage to himself as possible until he leveled up. He now had a goal to strive for. Let's do this. Jin-Woo equipped Kasaka's Venom Fong. Remaining time, 3 hours 59 minutes and 59 seconds. As soon as the penalty quest began, Jin-Woo rushed forward even before the centipede had a chance to make a move. Closing the gap between them in a split second, Jin-Woo jumped at the creature. TMP. With one strong leap, he landed on a leg about halfway up the length of its body and proceeded to hack at the creature while climbing it. SHHHK. Shunk. SHHHK. Each stab from Kasaka's Venom Fong left a cut that leaked fluids. Scree. The centipede screeched and thrashed about with every slash, like it was in pain. Dash. Jin-Woo's speed shot up. TMP, 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 TMP. The hunter made his way to the top of the creature in a flash, where he gripped his dagger with both hands and prepared to strike. An fatal strike. With the skill activated, he stabbed the centipede with all his might. The blade penetrated the centipede's head. KRRRK. The level of skill, Fatal Strike, has increased. Yeah. It had been a while since he'd heard good news of any kind. The damage from the leveled up Fatal Strike seemed to be substantial as the centipede violently flailed. Scree, scree. But Jin-Woo didn't stop there. He maneuvered his way to its back, where it was wide open and defenseless. Shunk. He drove in his dagger, tightened his grip on the handle, then slid down the centipede's back. SHHHHHHHNNNK. A strength of over 120 coupled with a fall from the height of a 5-story building carved the centipede's back open spectacularly. SHHHHHNK. TMP Jin-Woo landed safely. Scree, scree. Fluids exploded in a geyser as the centipede convulsed and crashed into the ground. Whump. The impact kicked up sand everywhere. Ping. You have defeated poison-toothed giant desert centipede. Jin-Woo fanned away the dust to check the remaining time. Remaining time, 3 hours 59 minutes and 42 seconds. that took me 17 seconds. It took less than 20 seconds to kill a giant centipede. It was a huge difference from how his battle against Cerberus had gone. Jin-Woo's current power was on a completely different level. Considering how many times I leveled up since then. Not to mention all the items I'm wearing. It made perfect sense. He was positive he could finish off the centipedes without losing any HP. The problem is, are there enough of them to kill so I can level up? That was the key to succeeding at the job change quest. The only thing awaiting him if he couldn't recover his HP would be certain death. Just then, more columns of sand shot into the sky. FFFSSSHHHH. FFFSSSHHH. Having smelled the blood of their kind, a number of centipedes were now converging on the area. Grara! Grara! Jin-Woo's expression brightened. How many of them are there exactly? Seeing all their heads poking out of the sand, Jin-Woo couldn't keep the grin off his face. You have leveled up. You have leveled up. You have leveled up. You have leveled up. For hours later, after battling all those centipedes, Jin-Woo had leveled up 4 more times and was now at level 51. The penalty quest was at its end. Penalty quest, survival, objective, survive the required time. Required time, 4 hours remaining time, 3 minutes and 19 seconds. It was almost time to return. Jin-Woo took in the sight around him. The corpses of centipedes littered the desert. Thanks to their sacrifice, he had been able to recover his HP, too bad there weren't any item or gold drops. Although that would have defeated the point of the penalty zone. In any case, it was time to get ready. Shop. Balance, 3,115,629 gold. Humanoid monsters often dropped bags of gold, and he'd earned an additional 1,500,000 gold from Igris, so he had lots to spare. Jin-Woo spent most of it on a single weapon. He'd spotted something that was just what he needed. Item, Night Killer, acquisition difficulty, B category, dagger attack power plus 75. A sharp and sturdy dagger designed to penetrate armor. The blade has a sawtooth design to prevent it from glancing off armor. Buff, Kill the Knights, damage output increases by 25% when facing armored opponents. It was a weapon made for battling armored adversaries and cost 2,800,000 gold. It would mean spending the majority of his savings, but there was no reason to nitpick about the price. Gold doesn't mean anything if I'm dead. He made the purchase without thinking twice. You have purchased Night Killer. You have purchased bandages. Jin-Woo also bought some bandages. He gripped Night Killer with its scary-looking sawtooth blade in his right hand and wrapped them together tightly with the bandage. Swish, fwish. Night Killer felt like an extension of his hand as he took some practice swings. At least I won't drop it. For a second, he considered securing Kasaka's venom fang to his left hand but ultimately decided against it. It would have been too awkward having both hands bound. He decided that it would be better to have one free. As he put the remaining bandages into his inventory, Jin-Woo spotted the runestone he had acquired from Igris. Oh yeah, I forgot I had this. Runestone, Ruler's Hand, you may obtain the skill by crushing the stone. Jin-Woo needed whatever help he could get, whether it was an item or a skill. Without further ado, Jin-Woo crushed the runestone. You learn skill, Ruler's Hand. Skill, Ruler's Hand, LV.1, active skill. No mana required. The user can physically manipulate objects without touching them. Oh. The description brought to mind the moment when Igris had stretched out its hand toward its sword across the room. So that's how it moved the sword. A skill that would allow him to move objects with a single thought. And it didn't require any mana, either. If this skill can really move around anything, it'll be a game changer. Jin-Woo tested the skill on a nearby centipede corpse. Object cannot be moved due to low proficiency. Object cannot be moved due to low proficiency. It appeared as though Jin-Woo needed to level up the skill before he could move heavier objects. Then how about this? Jin-Woo dropped Kasaka's venom fang at his feet, then held out his palm. The dagger shot into his hand. Tack! Wow! He snatched the blade's hilt and looked at it with wonder. This'll be a big help. With that, he was ready to go. When he raised his head, time was almost up. Remaining time, 4 seconds. At 3 seconds remaining, there was a message from the system. Ping. The penalty quest will terminate shortly. And another message followed. Ping. As you have attempted to hunt in the penalty zone, the difficulty of the next penalty zone will be upgraded accordingly. The adjustment was most likely to make hunting harder so it would feel like an actual punishment. But will there be a next time? Jin-Woo took a deep breath. Now back to the job change quest. There had to be several hundred monsters awaiting him in the boss's lair. Their numbers might have increased. To put it nicely, he was being transferred back to the dungeon, but the reality was more like he was being thrown to the wolves. HP, mana, fatigue, items, skills, and determination. Currently, he was in a much better position than when he'd first set foot inside the job change dungeon, but he still couldn't help feeling anxious. Ba-dump, ba-dump, ba-dump. His heart beat so hard, it almost hurt. He closed his eyes, trying to keep his cool. Finally, the chime sounded. Ping. You have completed the penalty quest. This is my last chance. Jin-Woo opened his eyes again, and was met with the sight of all the silver knights simultaneously slowly turning in his direction. However, they were not his priority. His eyes sharpened in focus as he scanned the area. Gotta start with the mages. His reasoning for this was simple. If I'm right. He hoped to confirm a theory he'd come up with in the penalty zone. Thud, 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 thud. Knights charged at him aggressively, but Jin-Woo calmly stepped onto the shoulders of the knight in the forefront and launched himself into the air. From that vantage point, he could see the whole room. Where are they? There. He spotted a mage not too far from him. I knew it. He had been correct about what he had witnessed earlier. He wasn't just seeing things. When Jin-Woo had reached his hand out through the horde of knights, he'd seen something through a small gap that hadn't made sense at the time. A mage was casting spells without pause. There was nothing out of the ordinary about a mage using magic, but Jin-Woo was convinced that something was off. If you think about it. Where was the magic? Only the knights were directly attacking Jin-Woo. He could hear the mages chanting, but none of it resulted in a show of actual power, with one exception. When one of them negated his stealth skill with eyes of detection, the knights around him had paused momentarily. Initially, Jin-Woo had assumed the knights had frozen because their target had disappeared, but he'd had the belated realization while hunting centipedes in the penalty zone. Around the time he'd killed the 8th centipede, he'd pumped his fists in celebration when the standard level up message appeared. You have leveled up. His HP had recovered fully. But his happiness was cut short when he had sensed something wasn't right. It's easy to level up here, so why couldn't I level up over there? The system had warned him about the loss of HP recovery when leveling up but hadn't said anything about not being able to level up at all. Thinking back, he was able to level up 5 times before the start of the job change quest, but he hadn't leveled up once afterward despite lasting 6 minutes and defeating close to 100 knights. Mages that weren't casting spells and knights that didn't award experience points. As soon as Jin-Woo put these two together, a new possibility formed in his head. Maybe the knights in the lair were fake. The reason they stopped moving wasn't that Jin-Woo had vanished but rather because the mage controlling them had to temporarily stop casting to use eyes of detection. And if I'm right, he was about to test his theory. He dodged the knights who tried to grab him and made a beeline for the mage by jumping off their heads and shoulders. Jin-Woo sensed the mage was starting to panic. Its chanting quickened. The knights suddenly went from solely attacking to gathering around the mage to protect it. The possibility was becoming a surety. TMP. He landed in front of the mage. Without a moment's hesitation, he stabbed it in the heart with his dagger. Fatal strike. Shunk. The mage soundlessly vanished in a puff of black smoke. You have defeated a mage. And at the same time, clunk, CLA clunk. Like marionettes with cut strings, the horde of knights previously attacking Jin-Woo collapsed to the ground. They were nothing but suits of armor scattered on the floor. I was right. Jin-Woo cheered in his mind. After coming close to death multiple times, he had finally figured it out. The knights weren't the real threat. The mages controlling them were the true targets. The first thing I actually killed with the Night Killer was a mage. Jin-Woo chuckled at the irony as he gazed at the abandoned robes on the floor. He'd found his stride again, but there was no time to relish in his victory. The quest wasn't over yet. Thud, 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 thud. The ground quaked, and Jin-Woo turned to see countless knights were already swarming around him. That meant there were more mages hidden somewhere, controlling these puppets. Knights leaped at him. Jinwoo's right hand moved so fast, it was almost invisible. Schwack! The first row was sliced in half. Jin-Woo blinked in astonishment. Whoa! It was 2,800,000 gold well spent. Night Killer cut through the armor like it was paper. It wasn't merely because of the sawtooth blade. As described, Night Killer was made for battling armored adversaries, and Jin-Woo could sense magic emanating from the dagger. Who knew the shop weapons were this good? It was quite different from public opinion, which was that store-bought weapons were a last resort, something to turn to only when there was no other alternative. I guess that makes gold even more valuable now, doesn't it? At the very least, they were better than standard hunter-issue weapons. He might also be able to make a lot of money by buying weapons from the shop and reselling them to other hunters. Unlike consumable items, there was no rule that forbade him from transferring a weapon to another person. Focus. I need to focus. This was no time to get distracted. Knights continued converging on Jin-Woo. Shwick. Shhhk. He cut them down in groups while avoiding their attacks, but it was clear. This is futile. He'd reduced their numbers only to look in another direction and see even more closing in. Shhhk. He beheaded another one. I need to find the mage. Before the headless knight hit the ground, Jin-Woo hopped onto its shoulders and launched himself up. Stealth. Whom? Jin-Woo faded from sight. Of course, his aim wasn't to hide but rather. A mage has used skill, eyes of detection. A mage has used skill, eyes of detection. A mage has used skill, eyes of detection. Ping, ping. A high-pitched alarm chimed from all directions. He bounded from one knight's head to the next to pinpoint the telltale eye symbols. There are 5 mages in all. He targeted the one closest to him. As soon as Jin-Woo looked its way, the mage hurriedly commanded knights to protect it, but... Whoosh! Kasaka's venom thong flew out of Jinwoo's left hand and straight into the center of the mage's forehead. KRRRK. You learn skill, dagger throw. You have defeated a mage. CA clang. Hundreds more knights collapsed. 4 left. Leaping off one knight's head to another, Jin-Woo swiftly made his way to his next target. Wait. He looked back at Kasaka's venom thong, which he hadn't retrieved. It was time to use his new skill. Ruler's Hand. When Jin-Woo reached out toward Kasaka's venom thong, the dagger flew back like a magnet. Yes. He snatched the blade out of the air. Not needing to retreat to retrieve his weapon meant he could move more efficiently. In a flash, he reached the next mage. Before it could react, Jin-Woo slashed at it. You have defeated a mage. More knights fell, and now less than half their numbers remained. Victory was close at hand. The glare in Jinwoo's eyes intensified. 3 to go. Feeling threatened, the mages gathered in one spot, and the knights congregated together as well. The mages then began chanting in unison. Their creepy voices rang through the room as their spell was cast. KRRRRK, KRRRRK. The knights guarding the mages suddenly crumpled as if they were under an invisible industrial hydraulic press. They reformed into one gigantic steel golem that immediately set its sights on Jin-Woo. Guh! Are you kidding me? Jin-Woo was genuinely amazed by the pressure coming from the monster, but he wasn't afraid of it. He had flirted with death so many times before that he felt more animated than nervous. Stomp, stomp, stomp. The ground shook with each step the golem took. It was a force to be reckoned with. Whoosh! Jin-Woo readily ducked to avoid the monster's punch. Boom! The metal fist grazed the stone pillar behind him, breaking it in half. I mean, it's pretty terrifying, but... Jin-Woo smirked. If he hadn't figured out what was going on here, he would have struggled against the giant. As it was, though, he had nothing to worry about. Go! As the golem prepared to smash down at him with both hands, Jin-Woo charged toward it using the dash skill instead of retreating. He then slid through the golem's legs and came out behind it in an instant. While the golem hurried to turn, Jin-Woo stepped in front of the now defenseless mages. The startled mages trembled. Checkmate! Jin-Woo wore a contented smile. The phrase "united we stand but divided we fall" had backfired in this case, as the mages were now easier to defeat because they were all huddled together. Jin-Woo swung both daggers. You have defeated a mage. You have defeated a mage. You have defeated a mage. The three mages became black smoke just as the others had. The golem, which had been grasping at Jin-Woo in vain, disintegrated into sand and scattered. But Jin-Woo kept his guard up. Is it over? Or are there more? Just in case, he braced himself until he heard the sound of a notification. Ping! Jin-Woo held his breath. Contrary to his fears, though, the system announced the end of the quest. The job change quest has concluded, as all the monsters in the trial room have been defeated. Your job will be assigned shortly. Depending on the advancement points acquired, you may progress to a higher class. Only then was Jin-Woo able to let out his breath in relief. Phew! It had been a difficult battle. If he'd been preoccupied with the instant teleportation stone, he wouldn't have figured out how to defeat these monsters. I probably would have been figuring out when to bail. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, he had lost the instant teleportation stone, and that had forced him to concentrate on the battle. The end result was an unequivocal success. His efforts would now be compensated. Jin-Woo looked at the timer. 4 hours 29 minutes and 16 seconds, the timer was frozen. He had survived 4.5 hours in the dungeon. But that wasn't all. It was a quest he could have cleared simply by enduring, but he'd forcefully ended the quest by killing all the monsters. He started getting anxious about how many points he had earned and what job he'd be able to choose based on those points. An appropriate job will be assigned after analyzing your actions. Sounds good. If his job was decided by how he'd responded, then the odds of him ending up with a class that would only bring him trouble would be negated. He was thankful for that. Wherever the player goes, the angel of death follows. Whatever path the player takes, it is littered with corpses and the stench of blood remains. The words were a little harsh, but he couldn't exactly refute them. It was all to level up, but... He'd repeatedly killed monsters until he couldn't level up anymore in instance dungeons, and he'd hunted down every single tiny magic beast hiding in regular dungeons. And even though it had never been his intention, there had been a few times he'd fought other hunters. The angel of death, corpses, the stench of blood, no matter how you look at it. It sounded like he was destined to be an assassin class. In addition, the player craves great power and blazes his own trail without relying on others. Jin-Woo nodded. Overall, he agreed with the system's evaluation. I never had any colleagues to rely on in the beginning. However, he didn't understand why all this was being included in an analysis for a job change. The system continued its evaluation. Because your desire for power is strong enough to summon lost souls back from death's embrace, an army of the undead that answers only to you will clear you a path without the help of others, an army of the undead? Jin-Woo was starting to think that things weren't going the way he'd planned. Wait! Before he could protest, the system announced his results in its usual unconcerned tone. Your job is necromancer. Huh? Jin-Woo was floored. Everything had been pointing toward assassin, so where did necromancer come from? Jin-Woo stared blankly at the screen. He rubbed his eyes, but nothing changed. Your job is necromancer. The message was the same. After the denial came the anger. I've never bothered with the intelligence stat, so why the hell? Of all the different mage class hunters out there, why was he assigned the rarest of the rare jobs? Ever since first awakening as an E-rank hunter, Jin-Woo had always been a brawler. With the exception of the steel sword, he'd exclusively used daggers, and all the skills he'd earned up to now made him perfectly suited to be an assassin. That was why he never dreamed he would be anything but. And yet, he'd been assigned a mage class and a necromancer on top of that. Even though Jin-Woo's knowledge of jobs mostly came from video games, he knew the basics of what necromancers entailed. They were dreary-looking mages with an army of zombies behind them. No matter how he thought about it, he was hard-pressed to make any connection between that kind of character and himself. Jin-Woo frowned and shook his head. I need to calm down first. Even if his mind was a jumbled mess right now, he had to handle this calmly. Tranquility was his special weapon. As his anger subsided, he was able to center himself. Wait, this is reminding me of denial followed by anger. Jin-Woo realized he was going through the 5 stages of grief like a hospital patient who had received devastating news from their doctor. I think the next step is bargaining, or maybe compromise? But there was no way to bargain or compromise with the system. If he had to find one good thing about being a necromancer, it was that. Well, according to the system, he could command an army of his own. The problem is that it would be an army of skeletons and rotting corpses. Everyone would go nuts if he walked around with that kind of battalion trailing behind him. People already feared hunters as much as they admired them, and the system wanted him to become a hunter who led an army of the undead. Whether or not the job suited him, he didn't think he could handle it. Ping. Will you accept this job? The system required a response. That was comforting. At least I have a say. Jin-Woo gave a sigh of relief. If the system wasn't forcing it onto him, it meant that there would be other opportunities. If that was the case, there was nothing to think about. Jin-Woo happily declined the offer. No, as he did, the system asked him again. Necromancer is a hidden class. Will you still decline? Even though it was a similar question, his answer didn't come as easily the second time. He hesitated to reply. A hidden class. It sounded like something out of a video game, but hunters with unique abilities did actually exist. He'd heard stories of a hunter who could generate a shield and one who could give buffs. Rumor has it that Yunho Baek, guild master of the White Tiger Guild, has the ability to transform into a magic beast. Hunters with special capabilities were recruited by large guilds and enjoyed extraordinary privileges. Is a hidden class something like that? If that was the case, it might be good to accept. What the system had said popped into his head. It recommended the necromancer job because I desire great power. That meant necromancers were that powerful. Considering how most awakened beings with rare abilities were support-type hunters, this was encouraging. A special ability for fighting. Jin-Woo started to get excited. If only I could experience what it would be like to be a necromancer, this wouldn't be as hard a decision. But it was never that easy, was it? He couldn't exactly make things happen to suit his wishes, and he'd never even heard of a hunter with this kind of power before. How could a mage control his own army and fight at the SA? He didn't have to finish the thought. Oh. Jin-Woo looked at the remnants of the knights around him. Those mages. The mages from the job change quest could have been demonstrating the necromancer abilities. The knights were their armies. There's no doubt. It wasn't easy battling knights that rushed into battle with no regard for their own lives. If he hadn't worked out how to defeat them or if the mages had been skilled fighters. Instead of all this scrap metal, I'd be the one on the ground. Jin-Woo turned away from the knights and raised his head. His eyes were sparkling. I'm already a brawler. That was the difference between him and the mages. If a mage who could hold his own could also command an entire army, wouldn't that be the absolute worst nightmare for his enemies? And maybe he'd always dreamed of clearing a B-rank dungeon or higher by himself. Jin-Woo swallowed hard. If he continued to level up even after becoming a necromancer, the troops under his command would become stronger as well. The results of that synergy were unimaginable. I wouldn't be leveling up alone. His army would advance as well. Is it possible? Suddenly, he got goosebumps. Jin-Woo looked up at the floating window. It was still waiting for his reply. Necromancer is a hidden class. Will you still decline? It wasn't rushing him to make a decision like it usually did. Jin-Woo thought to himself, is this what you wanted? Of course, there was no answer. After much agonizing, he eventually reached a decision. If this would grant him power, then he would gladly accept. There was no hesitation this time. Will you accept this job? Yes. The system instantly displayed subsequent messages. Ping. Your job has been finalized. Depending on the advancement points acquired, you may be offered the opportunity to advance to a higher class. Starting calculations. Calculating advancement points. While the system was calculating, Jin-Woo unwrapped the bandage on his right hand. Because he'd clutched the dagger so tightly, his palm was swollen and red. I'm going to have blisters. He sucked in a breath. This could easily be healed with a drop of healing potion, and not being able to use potions was proving inconvenient. He finished unwrapping the bandage and was about to put Night Killer into his inventory when the notification sounded. Ping. Jin-Woo reflexively turned. You have exceeded the expected time limit. Bonus points will be awarded. Bonus points. He'd figured as much. I don't know what the expected time limit was, but I definitely lasted for a long time. Jin-Woo was looking pleased with himself when he was inundated with messages. You did not use the instant teleportation stone. Bonus points will be awarded. Leftover HP is over 50%. Bonus points will be awarded. You defeated all the enemies. Bonus points will be awarded. Your total advancement points exceeded the achievement threshold. Based on the contract, a special reward will be offered. Ping, ping, ping. What the? All the beeping rang in his ears, but he didn't pay it any attention, as his mind was already on something. A special reward? The words jumped out at him. A reward, and a special one at that. He stopped short of putting Night Killer into his inventory and focused on the message. His eyes were glued to the screen. Before long, more messages followed. Ping. Your job has changed from Necromancer to Shadow Monarch. You have learned job-exclusive skills. You have acquired bonus stats. You have acquired title, the one who overcame adversity. Shadow Monarch? Overwhelmed by the unfamiliar terms, Jin-Woo hurriedly called up his stat window. Name, Jin-Woo Sung, level, 51, job, Shadow Monarch, there it was. It's not Necromancer? The system had clearly said Jin-Woo would be able to upgrade to a higher class depending on the advancement points he'd earned. It had also mentioned that his total advancement points had exceeded the achievement threshold. The end result was Shadow Monarch. Then was this the special reward the system was talking about? Jin-Woo was suddenly struck speechless. Something strange and inexplicable was happening before his very eyes. Past the message holograms, black smoke was exuding from the fallen knights littered on the ground. Nothing like this had occurred prior to the job change. Without their masters, the monsters were basically scrap metal, and yet. Jin-Woo closed the stat window and scanned the area. It wasn't just one or two of them. The black smoke was coming off all the knights. Shadow extraction is possible. Shadow extraction is possible. Shadow extraction is possible. And with every glance at a foe emitting the black smoke, a message popped up saying that he could perform a shadow extraction. Extracting a shadow? Jin-Woo couldn't explain it, but it looked to him like the swirls of smoke were writhing in pain. It felt as if they were reaching out to him, asking him to save them. Were those actual screams he could hear? But he was utterly certain he could save them from their pain. Shadow extraction. Please designate a command word for skill, shadow extraction. I have to personally choose a command word? Jin-Woo thought about it for a second before instinctively blurting out a word. Arise. As soon as he spoke, Hiya, low moans came out of nowhere as the shadows of the night squirmed, almost like they were alive. Jin-Woo inspected his surroundings again. All the shadows around him were shifting. Soon, a black hand rose up out of a shadow. It slammed into the ground and pulled itself up. Holy shit! Jin-Woo's eyes were about to pop out of his head. It looked like a person, or, rather, a soldier in the shape of a human. One by one, knights covered in pitch-black armor rose from the shadows. This is a skill? By the time Jin-Woo pulled himself together, there were tens of soldiers standing at attention. Shadow extraction successful. Tens of knights surrounded him. What in the... Jin-Woo walked up to the knight closest to him. He placed his hand on the armor, which felt like actual metal. It wasn't just that it looked like armor, but these were genuine knights ready to march into battle. They're humanoid, but they weren't. Jin-Woo couldn't detect any signs of life from them. They didn't breathe or have heartbeats. Furthermore, Jin-Woo held in a gasp. When he looked into the eye holes of the helmet, it was like staring into the proverbial abyss. He slowly stepped away because it felt as if his body would be sucked into the darkness. This thing was made from a shadow? Jin-Woo called up the skill window. As the system had informed him, there were new job-exclusive skills there. Job-exclusive skills, active skill, Shadow Extraction LV.1, Shadow Storage LV.1. He decided to start with the first one on the list. Skill, Shadow Extraction LV.1, Job Exclusive Skill. No mana required. Extracts mana from a body whose life has come to an end and transforms it into a shadow soldier. Odds of extraction failure rise depending on the target's stats and the amount of time between death and extraction. Active shadow extraction, 30-30. After reading that description, Jin-Woo understood the identity of the soldiers. They're all undead. Shadow soldiers, creatures extracted from the shadows of the dead. Jin-Woo gulped. If they really are my army. Jin-Woo extended his arm to the right. The soldiers simultaneously turned to the right. He slowly moved his hand in front of him. The soldiers turned in unison to face front. Jin-Woo stood in the heart of the army. He lowered his hand simply to calm himself, but then... Thud! 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 The soldiers took a knee as one. He could move them according to his will. Whoa! Jin-Woo couldn't help his exclamation or his delighted grin. Okay, this is pretty awesome.